The sound of screaming echoed through the hallway. I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, barely able to breathe. Through the thin walls, I could hear every word, every sob, every harsh slap. My mother's cries pierced the air like shattered glass. She begged him to stop. "You've already ruined my life," she shouted through the sobs. "But I won't let you destroy my daughters." Her voice cracked under the weight of pain. I glanced at my grandmother who stood by the door, not in shock or concern, but smiling. A soft, satisfied smile. That smile haunted me more than the violence itself. How could anyone find comfort in someone else's suffering? How could she not only allow this, but enjoy it? Moments later, the door swung open and my father stormed out, his face twisted with anger. He didn't even look at me. He turned to my grandmother and spat, "Why did you bring this woman into my life? She's going to destroy us with her stubbornness." My grandmother shook her head, her voice calm, laced with false innocence. How was I supposed to know she'd be so foolish? All she does is give birth to daughters, no sons, no legacy. I was only 14, but I understood the message clearly. We were burdens, unwanted. Every bruise my mother carried was tied to the absence of a son, yet tonight felt different. It wasn't just about her. I had heard my name in the middle of their argument. That had never happened before. My mother emerged some time later, her eyes swollen, lips trembling. She looked like she had aged 10 years in one night. Her arms were covered in bruises, her hair clung to her face, damp with sweat and tears. I rushed to her, handed her a glass of water, and helped her sit. She refused to meet my eyes. "What happened?" I asked gently, even though I feared the answer. "Why was he shouting about me?" She hesitated. Then finally she whispered, "He wants to get you married. He's read something or heard something, and now he's obsessed with the idea. Says he'll arrange the contract now and let you finish school before sending you away." I told him no. I told him you're too young. And that's why he hit me. She held my hand tightly and begged, "If he ever brings it up in front of you, promise me you'll say no. You're not ready, and I don't trust his reasons." My mind was spinning. I didn't understand why he would want this, but I knew enough to believe her. He had never done anything for us out of love. Everything he did came with a price. My mother's warnings weren't just fear. They were prophecy. And despite the fire rising in my chest, I could already feel the walls closing in around me. 2 days passed like a blur. I stayed quiet, barely daring to speak unless spoken to. Every sound in the house made me flinch. I knew something was coming, something inevitable. On the third evening, just as the sun was disappearing behind the rooftops, my father called me into the living room. His tone was oddly calm, too calm. That's what scared me most. I stepped in cautiously. He was sitting on the worn-out couch, legs crossed, arms relaxed. Beside him sat my grandmother, her eyes glinting with anticipation. Across from them, my mother stood with her arms folded tightly against her chest, her face pale and unreadable. "I have good news," he said, smiling as if announcing something joyful. "I've arranged your marriage. The formal contract will take place in 2 days. Don't worry, you won't have to leave just yet. You'll finish your studies first, then we'll talk about sending you off. But the family is wealthy. This is a golden opportunity." My mouth went dry. I turned to my mother. Her eyes were screaming, but her lips didn't move. She gave me a small shake of her head, barely noticeable, but enough for me to catch the message. I swallowed hard. "I don't want to get married right now," I said softly, almost whispering. "Please." The silence that followed was brief, but thunderous. His eyes darkened instantly. "I didn't ask for your opinion," he said, voice sharp. "You'll do what I tell you." I stood frozen as his words echoed in my ears. All I could hear was my mother's earlier plea, "Say no. No matter what, say no." But it didn't matter. The decision had already been made. 2 days later, they held the ceremony, not a wedding, just a small, quiet contract. No groom in sight, no family from his side, just signatures, a few mumbled prayers, and silence. No one told me who he was. No one explained what would come next. It was as if I were signing away my future in the shadows of my own home. My mother refused to sit through the event. She locked herself in her room and cried the entire evening. I knew because I could hear her, soft, muffled sobs slipping through the cracks in the door. Afterward, life returned to what could almost be called normal. The only difference was that my father, for the first time in my life, spoke to me without venom. He even smiled occasionally, and though he still fought with my mother, the beatings stopped. For a while, the house became strangely peaceful, but the peace felt wrong. It felt like a bribe. And deep inside, I kept wondering, who had I been married to? Why the secrecy? And what kind of man wouldn't even attend his own marriage? The questions lingered in the corners of my mind, but no one would answer them. I was left with only silence and fear. Years passed, but the silence around my so-called marriage never lifted. I never saw a photograph, never heard a name, never received a single word from the other side. My life moved on, or at least it appeared to. I returned to school, focused on my studies, and pushed everything else into the back of my mind. My mother grew quieter as well. The sadness in her eyes never really left, but the tension at home had eased, at least on the surface. Then one evening, something happened that shattered whatever false sense of calm I had built. I was 17 when my father returned home carrying a young boy, around 7 years old, with soft curls and piercing blue eyes. He looked like a painting come to life, far too beautiful to be real. "This is Kashif," my father said, placing a hand firmly on the boy's shoulder. "From now on, he lives here. He's mine now." His. The word hung in the air like poison. My mother and I stared at each other, then at the boy, then back at him. "Where is he from?" I asked slowly. "Who are his parents?" My father didn't answer. He simply walked into his room and shut the door behind him. My mother looked shaken, her lips moving as if to form 1,000 unspoken questions. She knelt down, cupped the boy's face in her hands, and whispered, "Who are you, child?" But he just smiled, unaware of the storm his presence had brought. Over the following days, Kashif settled into our home. Despite everything, it was impossible not to love him. He was kind, intelligent, and eager to learn. I became attached to him almost instantly. I began teaching him, helping him with reading and writing, taking him to school and back. He would run into my arms at the door each day like I was the only person he trusted. But something in my mother began to break. At night, I would find her sitting alone, staring at him with a sorrow so deep, it seemed to age her before my eyes. One night, I asked her why she looked at him that way. "I know where he came from," she said quietly. "He's not adopted. He's not someone's orphan. He's your father's." The words hit me like a slap. "He's the result of what I feared most," she continued. "He betrayed me. I gave him my entire life, and in return, he gave me this child and brought him into my house as if nothing ever happened." I tried to reason with her. "Whatever happened, it's not Kashif's fault," I said. "He's just a child." She nodded, but tears streamed down her face. "I know, and that's what hurts most. He's innocent, but every time I look at him, I see everything I lost." That night, for the first time in years, I cried with her. Not because of Kashif, but because everything that had been buried was starting to rise again. Time moved on, but grief has a way of settling deep into the walls of a home, making itself a quiet resident in every corner. My mother never quite recovered. The betrayal had hollowed something out inside her. She no longer argued, no longer resisted. Her energy was spent. The only thing she still worried about, obsessed over really, was me. She began speaking more often about my situation, asking why my father hadn't moved forward with the rest of the marriage. "You've done the contract," she would say. "Well, why hasn't anyone come for her?" But he never answered. He dismissed her concerns with silence or vague shrugs. The truth was, we were all still in the dark. My marriage remained an invisible thread binding me to a name I didn't know, a face I'd never seen. By now, I was managing the entire house. My mother had taken to bed more often than not, and my 2 younger sisters were still in school. Kashif had become my shadow. Though I was nearly twice his age, he was rarely apart from me. He followed me around the house, listened to everything I said, and obeyed my instructions like I was the only person he trusted. Despite the strange circumstances of his arrival, I loved him. I couldn't help it. He was smart, gentle, and protective in ways that seemed older than his age. I taught him how to read the Quran, how to pray, how to respect people. He wasn't the kind of boy who caused trouble, except for one thing. He struggled with academics. Every night, I sat with him, going over every subject until he got it right. I wanted him to succeed. I didn't want him to grow up like my father. But even as I gave Kashif everything, my own life remained paused. My marriage was never spoken of again, as if it had been erased from memory. My father rarely acknowledged me, except when absolutely necessary. He treated Kashif like a prince, doted on him in ways he never had with his daughters. And oddly enough, my grandmother, once obsessed with having a grandson, no longer complained. Kashif had filled that void for her. She grew quieter, almost peaceful, and slowly declined into her own world of silence. Then, one quiet morning, my mother passed away in her sleep. There was no drama, no final gasp for air, just an absence. Her body still, her face calm, as though she'd simply decided she'd had enough. Grief crushed me, but I couldn't fall apart. I had sisters to raise, a child to guide. I became a mother without ever giving birth, a widow without ever knowing her husband. From that day forward, I stopped thinking about my own future. My only purpose became their well-being. The word marriage didn't exist in my vocabulary anymore. I no longer wished for a husband, or even for companionship. I simply existed for them, and that was enough. At least, that's what I told myself. The years passed in a blur of repetition. Morning prayers, school runs, cooking, tutoring. I became the anchor of the household, holding everyone together while forgetting who I was. My two younger sisters slowly blossomed into their own identities, leaning on me for everything. Kashif, now a teenager, continued to be my shadow. He no longer needed help with his studies, but he still sought my presence in every moment of his life. He'd return from college each afternoon and narrate every detail of his day, his eyes lighting up when I listened. I would place my hand on his head, bless him with the kind of warmth I imagined a real mother would, and feel a strange mixture of love and distance. What I didn't notice, or perhaps ignored, was that somewhere along the line, he had stopped calling me sister. He just said my name. And none of us questioned it. Not my sisters, not my father. It had become so normal, so deeply embedded in our routine, that correcting him never occurred to anyone. My father aged quickly. He no longer yelled, no longer interfered in anything, unless it involved Kashif. After all these years, it was clear who mattered to him most, and I, surprisingly, had no bitterness left. Just fatigue. I had accepted long ago that love wasn't something I was born to receive. My only dream was to raise the three of them into good people, give them what I never had. Kashif graduated with honors. The day he came home holding his degree, the entire house buzzed with celebration. But I stayed quiet, standing behind everyone else, smiling from a distance. I didn't belong to their world anymore. I was their caretaker, their teacher, their shelter, but not an equal. A week later, everything changed. Kashif began bringing up a topic I had buried deep, my marriage. Not the mysterious one arranged when I was a child, but the one that had never happened. The idea of a real wedding, a real husband, a life for myself. He asked me outright why I never married. I avoided the question, but he kept pushing, and then he brought it up to my father. "You should arrange her wedding now," he said boldly one evening. "She's done everything for this family. It's time she lives for herself." My father's smile faded. "No," he said firmly. "That's not possible." "Why not?" Kashif asked, baffled. "What could possibly stop it?" The reply came like a dagger. "Because she's already married." The words sucked the air out of the room. My sisters looked at me. Kashif stared at my father. "Then call her husband," he challenged. "Tell him to take her." My father stood silent for a long moment before answering. He doesn't even know she's his wife. Confusion turned to horror on Kashif's face. I felt my own knees weaken. My father turned and left the room, leaving behind a silence that screamed louder than any outburst ever could. And we knew we had to find out the truth. The moment he left the room, something in Kashif snapped. He stood frozen for a second, then without a word turned and walked straight to my father's bedroom. I called after him in a panic, but he didn't stop. I rushed behind him, afraid of what he might do, afraid of what he might find. When I entered the room, he was already at the wardrobe, throwing open drawers, pulling out files, rustling through old envelopes and faded papers. "Stop it," I cried. What are you doing? He'll lose his mind if he sees this. I need answers, he said without looking up. And I'm going to get them. File after file fell to the floor until his hands paused on one. It was old, worn, and tied with a discolored red ribbon. Slowly, he untied it and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The edges were yellowed and the writing faint. But it was all there: names, signatures, dates. I stepped closer, reading over his shoulder. As my eyes moved line by line, my breath caught in my throat. Bride: Rashida, daughter of Nasir. Groom: Kashif, son of Nazir. My vision blurred. My mouth went dry. I snatched the paper from his hands and read it again, hoping I had misunderstood, hoping it was a mistake. But it wasn't. It was real. It had been real all along. I dropped the document. My hands trembled, my legs gave way beneath me, and I sank to the floor, unable to think, unable to breathe. Kashif stood still, his expression unreadable, his lips slightly parted as if trying to form words that wouldn't come. I don't understand, he whispered. Neither did I. How could I? I had raised him, taught him, tucked him into bed, protected him from the cruelty of the world, never knowing that the cruelest twist of fate had already bound us together. We sat there, not speaking, surrounded by the wreckage of files and truths too heavy to carry. Then we heard the door open. Our father stepped into the room and froze. His eyes darted from the open wardrobe to the papers scattered on the floor, then to the marriage certificate in my hand. There was no point pretending now, no use denying anything. The truth had finally caught up with him. Kashif stood, his voice shaking but sharp. "What is this?" he demanded. "Why am I married to her? Why didn't you tell us?" The man we had feared for so long didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten us. He simply sat down, rubbed his temples, and exhaled like someone who had run out of places to hide. "Because it was the only way," he said quietly. "You were never supposed to know, not like this." But it was too late for explanations. Too late for regret. The truth had been uncovered, and nothing, not silence, not lies, not even blood, could ever bury it again. He didn't look at us as he spoke, just stared blankly at the floor, his voice hollow, almost distant. "Your parents were dying," he began. "Car crash, both of them. I was the only one at the hospital with them. Your father begged me with his last breath, 'Take care of my son. Make sure he's never alone.' He thought I would raise you with love, that I would protect you." Kashif sat on the floor, silent, fists clenched. "But then the lawyers came," the man continued, "and they told me your parents left everything in your name. All their wealth, property, accounts, everything. I was listed as legal guardian until your 21st birthday. That's when you'd officially inherit." He looked up at me finally, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Shame. "I never planned it at first," he said. "But when I saw the numbers, when I realized how much was at stake, I changed. I thought, what if I could make you family permanently? What if I tied your fate to mine in a way you'd never escape? That's when I had the idea. I had you married to Rashida. She was just a girl then, didn't understand anything. You were a child. It was perfect. A secret wedding, no questions. That way, when you grew up, your wealth would still belong to this household." He paused and looked at the scattered papers, now symbols of betrayal. "I kept you close, raised you here, fed you, clothed you. I gave you everything. But it wasn't love, it was fear. Fear that if you ever found out, you'd take it all away." Kashif finally spoke. His voice was quiet but burning. "You made me your son, just so you could control me." The man nodded slowly. "I convinced myself it was survival, that I had a right, your father had everything, I had nothing. And Rashida?" Kashif's voice cracked. "She was just part of the plan?" "She was convenient," he admitted, eyes falling back to the ground. "I needed someone I could manipulate. I never thought she'd become a mother to you. That was never supposed to happen." Every word he said felt like poison in the air. I hadn't moved. I couldn't. My body felt foreign to me. The girl who once dreamed of love, of freedom, of a future, that girl had vanished a long time ago. And now, I wasn't even sure who I was. A wife? A sister? A pawn? The silence that followed was long, heavy, and irreversible. Then Kashif stood up. "You won't make another decision for us," he said. "Ma, not anymore." He walked over to me and reached out his hand. I looked at it, hesitant, unsure of what to believe anymore, but something in his eyes calmed me, not anger, not confusion, but clarity. The past had been stolen from us. But maybe the future still belonged to us. That night, I locked myself in my room. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the wall, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a mountain. I had spent years calling Kashif my child in my heart, feeding him, guiding him, loving him as a mother loves her son. And now I knew he had always been my husband, legally, secretly, unknowingly. How does a person come back from that? A gentle knock broke the silence. I didn't respond. A moment later, the door creaked open and Kashif stepped inside. He sat down beside me, his presence quiet but solid, as if trying not to disturb the delicate threads holding me together. He didn't speak right away. He just sat there, watching me breathe, watching my hands tremble in my lap. Then slowly he reached out and held one of them. "I know this is a nightmare," he said gently, but I need to say something. Just listen, and if you still want me to leave, I will." I looked at him, barely able to hold his gaze. But I didn't stop him. "You didn't choose this, neither did I. We were both used by the same man. And maybe that's what connects us more than anything else. I don't want to pretend that what happened didn't scar you, but I also don't want to pretend that I can live the rest of my life pretending I don't care about you." My eyes filled with tears. "You've been my guide, my teacher, my entire world. I never understood why I felt so fiercely protective of you. Why your sadness hurt me like it was my own. Why I couldn't bear to see anyone else take your place. Now I understand. Somewhere along the way, love had already happened." I looked away, unable to respond. "You have every right to walk away from all of this. From me. If you want to remarry, I will help you. If you want to live alone, I'll still support you. But if you can still find room in your heart for me, if you can try to see me not as a boy you raised, but as the man who wants to give you the life you always deserved, then I'll never let go." His voice broke on the last words, and mine broke in response. I lowered my head and whispered, "I don't want to start over with someone else. I've already lived half my life in your name. You've always been here, and I don't want to erase that." He exhaled slowly, relief flooding his expression. Then he pulled me into a soft, steady embrace, the kind that promises more than comfort, the kind that promises healing. That night, for the first time in years, I let myself believe that something beautiful might still come from something broken. And for the first time, I didn't feel like someone's shadow. I felt seen. Kashif kept his word. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He simply stayed, gentle, patient, present. Over time, the awkwardness began to fade. Slowly, I stopped feeling like a stranger in my own life. We adjusted cautiously with a tenderness that came from shared pain rather than romantic fantasy. He began taking over the family business, showing a maturity that surprised even me. As he grew into his role, I watched the boy I once guided transform into a man I could lean on. We never held a second wedding. There was no celebration, no ceremony, but he began introducing me as his wife. Not proudly, not boastfully, just simply with truth. The house began to feel like a home again. My sisters, both now adults, had stepped into their own lives, and for the first time they looked at me not just as an older sister or guardian, but as someone who had earned her own place in this world. The man who had controlled every part of our story grew weaker with each passing day. The wealth he had schemed for so long to secure no longer gave him power. He became a name in a corner room, bedridden, silent, irrelevant. He had lost everything, not through punishment, but through time and truth. And in that quiet, I finally found my voice. When Kashif turned 21, he officially took ownership of everything his parents had left behind. The wealth my father had once tried so desperately to control was now entirely his. And yet, he never changed. He didn't gloat, didn't seek revenge. He simply managed the business, took care of the home, and continued to stand beside me, not as a child raised, but as a husband chosen through resilience and time. Our life was quiet, steady, no grand gestures, no dramatic turns, just the slow, healing rhythm of mutual respect and understanding. In his presence, I finally allowed myself to rest. Not because someone told me to, but because I was no longer surviving, I was living. He often said to me, "You've carried too much for too long. Let me carry the rest." And he did, with patience, with love. The man who once tore us apart with secrets eventually passed away, alone, with no legacy but the one we chose to rewrite. His silence followed him to the grave. But we didn't let it define us. Instead, we built something real from the ruins. And now when people ask about my story, I don't speak of tragedy. I speak of endurance, of a girl who lost her voice and found it again in the most unexpected place, in a boy who became a son, then a stranger. And finally, the man who taught her what love, real love, could look like, when it's chosen, not forced.